Welcome into the checklist, brought to you by Secure Mac. I'm Ken Ray.
I'm Nicholas Raba.
And I'm Nicholas Tachek.
2016, a year referred to by many as a dumpster fire. The good news for those people, it is a new year. Still, we thought we'd take one more look at the year that was from a security angle. Last week, we reviewed Mac security issues in 2016. This week, we'll do the iOS security year in review. Dividing the list into 5 topics, as we tend to do. Items on this week's checklist include Apple and the FBI and the locked up iPhone, the first Trojan horse for iOS, Trojan horses in the App Store, an iOS vulnerability trio, and finally, a year-long game of vulnerability whack-a-mole. So we start with, it really was probably the first story for iOS security in 2016, and I would argue maybe the biggest Apple story of the year on some level. Apple and the FBI and the iOS unlock drama.
Well, way back at almost the beginning of the year, headlines were filled with news of the standoff between Apple and the FBI. At the heart of that matter was a request by the FBI that Apple unlock and provide access to an iPhone belonging to the terrorist behind the San Bernardino shooting that took place in early December 2015. The FBI saw Apple's resistance to providing an unlock mechanism as hindering their investigation, while Apple saw it as a slippery slope issue. Apple argued that there was no way to securely provide the FBI with a tool to unlock just that single iPhone without weakening the security of all iOS devices for all users. And Apple worried that by giving in to the FBI on this particular case, they'd be opening the door to future requests for similar access to iOS devices. And if the unlock software happened to fall in the wrong hands, it would put all iOS users at risk. After taking Apple to court, the FBI eventually dropped their case at the last minute as they found a third-party unlock solution. Kind of a signal with this that Apple's fight for encryption and privacy is only just beginning, and there's sure to be future tests of it in the years to come. But Apple has proved that they're willing to stand up for their users' privacy and security.
It was really an amazing story on a bunch of levels. I mean, there were people who immediately said Apple needs to go ahead and relent. It was also an interesting story where it seemed like people people really did seem to think about it after a while. And I don't mean to sound condescending about that, but I mean, you even had lawmakers who had said initially Apple just needs to go ahead and do what the FBI wants, to circle back around later after being talked to about it, who finally did come to the opinion that a backdoor for the good guys, as Tim Cook, I believe, said, a backdoor for the good guys is a backdoor for the bad guys too.
Exactly, and that's kind of how it works with all encryption. You can't have a magic key for just the good guys. The bad guys will either gain access to it or figure it out, and then they'll have the same amount of insider access that the good guys have, which defeats the whole purpose. A lot of times, like the technicalities behind that are harder for lawmakers to comprehend if they're not already well versed in the security industry, which many of them aren't. So again, user education plays a huge role here, as we saw when people started to realize that, hey, this encryption protects more than just this single phone in this single case. It has really wide-ranging implications if it's weakened. It changed the opinion of a lot of people.
And yet I think something that we actually talked about, I believe we talked about it last week as well, or used this example. I mean, it feels like, and it's easy when we start talking about encryption to start thinking about it in terms of good guys and bad guys, but to switch out like who we think the good guys and bad guys are. I mean, if you're a privacy advocate, there are lots of people who sort of look at the Department of Justice as a bad guy because they're trying to get as much information as they can. They've got a job to do, and they see this, like getting access to this information, as part of their job. So nobody's necessarily saying that they're the bad guy in this situation. At the same time, it feels like they're gonna keep poking until they find a way in. And so, I mean, I want to say again that Tim Cook said it's a very strange position for Apple. Can't remember if it was Tim Cook or Bruce Sewell, Apple's legal counsel, but one of them said it's a really strange position for Apple to have to stand against the government and say, hey, no, wait a minute, we're doing what's right here. Really a strange story. And as I think you pointed out, one that's going to just keep going in various forms, probably from now on.
It was definitely one of the defining Apple security stories of 2016. Started the year out and will continue on.
Yeah, no doubt. Let's move on to the second item on today's checklist. The first iOS Trojan horse appeared.
Yeah, so in 2016, we saw the appearance of the first Trojan horse to infect non-jailbroken iPhones, simply by plugging them into a computer. Now, most of the Trojan horses and different threats that affected iPhone users were for the jailbroken ones. This was the first case for non-jailbroken phones. A little bit of background first. Jailbreaking is the removal of software restrictions imposed by Apple on iOS devices. So this allows a user to run apps from outside of the official App Store, but also opens up the device to all sorts of different threats. The majority of iOS malware specifically targets the jailbroken devices. The actual jailbreaking process involves exploiting vulnerabilities in iOS itself. So jailbreaking itself involves sidestepping the security measures Apple put in place to keep the iOS safe in the first place. So back to the topic at hand. In mid-March, the Ace Deceiver Trojan horse was found to be attacking non-jailbroken iOS devices. But the attack was a bit convoluted. It involved multiple steps to actually get the malware on the iOS device. Users first had to download one of the specific sets of infected apps from the App Store. The app would then prompt the user to download and install a separate program that would only run on Microsoft Windows. So once the user ran the Windows app from their iPhone plugged into the computer, the Trojan horse would be fully installed on that iOS device. And then any other iOS device plugged into the same computer would also get infected. Luckily, this attack was limited in scope, and Apple quickly removed the offending apps from the App Store. And the attack only appears to have targeted Chinese iOS users.
So not as widespread as it could be still. I mean, you're starting pretty big when you start with China. I mean, it's a lot of users. I mean, even if it could be worse, of course. It could be worldwide, but it's not like you're starting in Malta. No offense to Malta, by the way. And hey to everybody from Malta listening. Continuing with the Trojan horse thing then, we go from the very first iOS Trojan horse appearing to password-stealing Trojan horses turning up in the App Store.
So in late March, a pair of password-stealing Trojan horses were found in the official App Store. The Trojan horses were also being distributed in the Google Play Store, and they enticed Instagram users to see who viewed their profile. Now, this is a feature which isn't possible with the way Instagram currently works. Once installed, the malicious apps, they stole login credentials for Instagram, sending usernames and passwords to a server controlled by the malware authors. From there, the affected Instagram accounts were hacked and used to post spam messages on the user's feed. While not the first time these type of malicious apps were seen in the App Store, this particular attack was unique in a few ways. First, Apple already knew about the malware author. An app released under the same publisher's name, it was busted back in November 2015, when it was found to have pulled a similar stunt. At that time, the app was removed from the App Store, and that should have been the end of the story. For some reason, though, Apple didn't ban the malware developer account the first time around, which is the usual result of cases like this, because Apple has the ability to revoke a developer's code signing certificate, which is needed for the app to be able to run on the iOS device. When they do that, it could quickly stop the spread of malware. The Trojans remain live in the App Store for over 6 weeks, despite a slew of one-star reviews from users complaining that they'd been hacked after using the app. During this time, the app continued to rank high in charts across the board, even reaching number 1 in spots for entertainment app category in the Great Britain App Store. And it made it into the top 10 apps overall there. Prior to the removal from the Google Play Store, one of the Trojans was listed as having between 100,000 to 500,000 installs, and it's likely that a large number of iOS users were infected as well. After the apps were removed from the Google Play Store, Apple eventually followed suit and removed one of the malicious apps, but missed the second one. We actually ended up contacting Apple's security department to let them know that the other Trojan was still live in the App Store, at which it was taken down as well.
Can I ask a question? When you define this as a Trojan, I mean, was this actually, if memory serves, what you had to do was if you downloaded this app to see who it was that had checked you out on Instagram, you gave it your user information. So it wasn't like you installed it and you got to play a game and it was secretly doing something else. I mean, you were actually volunteering the information. I mean, you were just basically handing it over to the developers, weren't you?
Yeah, with this particular one, it would display kind of an Instagram username and password field for you to log in, and it would link it with your account. And you were granting full access to your account. It was also sending the username and password in plain text to the malicious server, but you were kind of granting the rights of that application anyway.
Right.
So it would have access either way. But no, it wasn't. It just essentially wouldn't work. If you tried to use it, it wouldn't actually let you see who viewed your profile because that didn't actually work with Instagram's API.
Right.
Basically, it was just a ploy. You know, you have users who want this feature. Instagram does not provide it. So the users go looking for an app that might provide it, and it doesn't. It's just trying to trick them into giving up their credentials, which worked for a number of users.
And there's plenty of websites where if you search like who's viewing my profile, they'll have the same interfaces and say, here, you could see who viewed this or who unfriended you or all these other things that isn't normally offered through the services that you're trying to figure it out. And you plug your information there. And again, more phishing schemes to get information out of you.
Not that posting spam is a small thing, but were they just about posting spam? Because I'm immediately thinking about all the stuff that we've talked about passwords before. The one thing that you guys say repeatedly is don't use the same password for everything. There are still going to be people out there who do. So was this an attempt to gain access to other services? Was this just about posting the spam to the Instagram accounts? Or do we even know exactly what they were trying to accomplish? Have we only seen this one part and we're not sure what happened with the rest of it?
I don't think we can say for sure. What we did see was the spam attempts and the attempts to log in. I actually installed a couple of the apps at the time on one of my test devices. I made up a fake Instagram account. And it was funny because I ended up changing the password on the fake account after verifying that the hacking, the password login stuff took place. And I just the other day got a email notification for the test account saying, "Are you having trouble accessing your account?" Which is what happens when someone tries to log in repeatedly with the wrong password or tries to do a recovery. So it's, the information is still out there. Someone's still trying to access that test account that doesn't actually have anything on it. But I found that interesting that however many months later, they're still trying to use that data.
Or that data was being sold to somebody else, or...
Exactly. But I didn't reuse that password anywhere, so I wouldn't know if they were trying to use it elsewhere. It was, unique username and password. So I don't think we could say for sure. But as far as the research that took place at the time it was just being used for the spam and accessing the account rather than anything beyond that.
Moving on to the next item on the list, a trio of iOS vulnerabilities led to some nasty spyware. Was this towards the end of the year? Was this throughout the year? Help me out. Which trio are we talking about?
This was the Pegasus trio in August. basically, early August, a series of events took place that led to the discovery of 3 severe vulnerabilities in iOS that were actively being used to spread spyware, in this case targeting human rights activists. Ahmed Mansour, a human rights activist from the United Arab Emirates, received a suspicious text message from a number he didn't recognize. Now, in the past, he had been targeted by government hackers trying to get into his account, so he was suspicious, rightly so. He contacted Citizen Lab, a digital rights watchdog, and they did some further research. Citizen Lab found that the text message led to an advanced piece of spyware that would have allowed the attackers to gain full control over Mansour's iPhone just by clicking one link in one text message. It turns out that this particular piece of spyware exploited 3 separate vulnerabilities in iOS, all of which were previously unknown. Now, as we've discussed here on the show before, zero-day exploits such as these command top dollar in the gray market of third-party exploit brokers. They're very expensive. They are usually used in targeted attacks like this. And even one zero-day exploit being used in an attack is enough to raise eyebrows. So to see 3 separate zero-day attacks being used all at once for one attack shows that there was some significant money behind this particular piece of spyware. Apple was notified of these vulnerabilities and raced to patch them. They had a really quick turnaround between iOS 9.3.4 and iOS 9.3.5, which came out in late August and closed those loopholes. So, in this case, they took action right away, but it does show that exploits for iOS are being used for spyware, for targeted attacks. Basically, that they do exist, and kind of scary.
Didn't you say earlier that there was one that was out there? Did you say a year and a half or 2.5 years before Apple got around to fixing it?
That's one we're going to be discussing next, actually.
Oh, sorry. Okay, my bad.
That's okay.
I've gotten a little ahead of myself in the notes. But I mean, okay, but then there's this other one that comes out. It's August 1st or August 3rd or whatever. It's early in August, and somebody says, "Hey, these 3 things," and they're really scary. And it's less than 30 days that Apple turns something around. Do they move faster on? Do they move faster on exploits that they know are actually being used? I mean, is there a difference? Do they move more quickly on something that's actually in the wild as opposed to just proof of concept?
Yes, for a number of reasons. First of all, if it's in the wild and has been reported as being exploited, it's obviously moved beyond theoretical proof of concept to an actual attack, and they're going to want to close that as soon as possible. It will take priority and precedence over pretty much anything else. Mm-hmm. Mainly for the security of the users there, although there's also the impact on the company. They don't want to be seen as lax on security. So especially when an attack picks up steam in the media, Apple has a very quick turnaround on fixing it, whereas stuff that's flying under the radar sometimes takes a bit longer. Not
because it's more difficult, but just because resources need to go where the danger, the more active danger lies.
Yeah, and every time you release a patch or an update for anything, be it a security vulnerability or a new feature or just a bug fix, there's a significant amount of testing that has to go on to make sure that fix isn't going to break something else or make something worse. And so, yeah, it's a lot of resources beyond just the team that coded that particular patch. You've got your internal company timelines, deadlines, schedules, and all that gets delayed and mixed up if you're introducing something kind of out of the blue like this. But again, something of that severity needs to be addressed immediately, and they had a really excellent turnaround time on that one.
Last item on the list is actually a whole bunch of items turned into one item. Apple's year of iOS vulnerability whack-a-mole. This is, I'm assuming that we're just now going to like just shotgun a bunch of different things that happen. Talk to me about what makes these many items the last item on the show.
Well, making each of these individual would have, ended up with a 2-hour show. So yeah, we're just going to kind of combine a bunch into one. Everybody saw that Apple released a bunch of updates to iOS 9 as well as iOS 10 throughout the year. A lot of those were normal improvements, bug fixes, whatever, but there were plenty of vulnerabilities that they patched because they had their hands full throughout the year. Apple spent a lot of time in 2016 patching vulnerabilities that cropped up in iOS. Good news for the users from a security standpoint, but it does show that iOS remains a prime target for attackers. Way back in January 2016, a year ago, Apple released iOS 9.2.1, which included a fix for a long-standing vulnerability that could have seen malicious captive portals stealing a user's cookies and impersonating them on sites they visited. So, with regards to captive portals, if you've ever connected to Wi-Fi at your local coffee shop, at a hotel, airport, you've likely encountered that special login page. They might have the username and password posted on the wall, or the hotel gives it to you when you check in. That's the captive portal. It's there. Here's how you log into our network and connect to the internet. Well, it turns out that a security firm called SkyCure had first discovered and reported a vulnerability to Apple back in June 2013. And it took Apple 2.5 years to get around to fixing it. Luckily, SkyCure acted responsibly, did not disclose the vulnerability publicly until after Apple had a chance to implement a fix. But the fact that it remained wide open for such a long time is pretty troubling. Again, obviously didn't take priority. It wasn't in the news. We didn't know about it till this past January.
Here's the thing, though. We didn't know about it publicly, but I think about, you guys always make fun of me when I say I went to Las Vegas and I took my iPhone because you're like, what are you doing? It's Vegas. And then on top of that, I usually happen to be there around the time of the Black Hat Conference. Not there for the Black Hat Conference, but you're always just like, you do literally laugh at me every time that I talk about that. So, I mean, the fact that we didn't know about this publicly, I mean, what would you say the odds are that this was unknown to anybody except for, what was it, SkyCure?
I couldn't say with any certainty, but hotel networks in particular have already been shown to be targets of attack in the past. Mm-hmm. So I wouldn't put it past somebody else knowing about it before that. Whether or not it was being exploited is one thing, but we've kind of stressed before, to avoid public Wi-Fi, if possible, use your own tether your iOS for your laptop, or if you have a different hotspot for internet service, it's always better than connecting to that random network. And this is a very, very good reason why that's the case.
I didn't mean to sidetrack because I know you've got some other vulnerabilities that you wanted to hit.
Plenty. Other vulnerabilities that were addressed throughout the year included a bug in Apple's encryption for iMessage. It allowed attackers to decrypt photos and videos that were supposed to be sent securely over iMessage. Another one could achieve remote code execution on an iOS device by simply sending the victim a booby-trapped image file. The end of the year, things didn't slow down either. There were a slew of continuing headaches for iOS users. Previous episode, we discussed the iCloud calendar spam issue, which proved to be rather tricky to delete without notifying the spammer that your email address was valid. Now, Apple did eventually take steps to tighten up the security and spam detection on their servers, so we haven't seen any more of that particular attack in the time since. There were a few more vulnerabilities that gave attackers ways to bypass the iOS activation lock, which Apple touts as a really powerful theft deterrent if it's working. That's basically the thing we've discussed here on the show as well, where if your iPhone gets lost or stolen, somebody can't just wipe it and sell it on eBay with the iPhone working again. It won't work until it's been properly unlocked. So back in November, a security researcher discovered that by entering a long string of characters for the Wi-Fi network name and password fields during the iOS setup process, he could bypass the activation lock and access the home screen. Now, Apple went on to patch that particular bug in iOS 10.1.1, but it appears they didn't quite lock everything down because other security researchers found they could still access the home screen by entering a string of emoji characters in the Wi-Fi network name and password field and rotating the screen at just the right time. And it really makes you wonder how they managed to find these bugs. I mean, that was probably one of the most out there activation lock bypasses that I've ever seen.
Some of these guys had to be game testers, playing the games to find every single spot where you could jump screens or do anything else within the game.
Not wanting to miss out on the fun, Siri played a role in some further security shenanigans. By utilizing security to enable voiceover on a locked iOS device and executing a specific sequence of taps on the screen, attackers were able to access the contacts and then eventually other portions of the phone, including photos, potentially the home screen. Another voiceover flaw gave attackers access to sensitive information because it would read the stored passwords aloud. Now, in that particular case, Apple took the sledgehammer approach to fix it and just disabled voiceover completely for the affected portions of iOS. Now, to wrap up the year, there was one final nasty vulnerability that surfaced at the tail end of 2016, and it basically renders the Messages app completely inoperable. By crafting an extremely long and complex vCard, which is a type of virtual business card used to share contact information, an attacker can send it to the victim, and it causes Messages to crash when it attempts to open the vCard. If you restart your device, you think that might fix things. It won't, because Messages will try and reopen the most recent text and crash once again. Now, in this case, I don't know if it was holiday spirit or what, but the attacker only wanted to point out the security flaw and didn't want to cause real damage, so he also released a fix for the issue where affected users can simply open a special link on their device to undo the damage. But still, I mean, that one's up there with definite headaches and annoyances to close out the year. So, well, Apple spent much of 2016 putting out various security fires, all virtual, unlike Samsung. They also made some great strides in hardening the security of iOS. There's no doubt that 2017 will continue to hold more threats in store, but Apple definitely appears to be up to the task of taking them on.
I gotta say, I kind of like this show. I kind of like this episode because so many episodes, it ends with, well, what am I supposed to do now? So it is kind of neat to look back and say, hey, look, there were all these problems. And hey, look, there were all these solutions. So Happy New Year, everybody. We start on a good note. And next week, we'll be talking about more, pitfalls and foibles and things like that. By the way, if you want to tell us things that you'd like to hear us talk about on future shows, or if you have a question about past shows, there are a couple of ways that you can do that. First of all, we do have there's a website for this show. If you want to check past notes or see what some of the current news is, it is securemac.com/checklist. That again is securemac.com/checklist. And as I said before, if you have something you want us to hit going forward or a question about something you heard in the past, we do have an email address. It is checklist@securemac.com. That address again is checklist@securemac.com. And if you have trouble remembering that, remember this: you are listening to The Checklist by Secure Mac. And we'll talk to you next week.